So we are now starting with our sessions on the panel discussion. And our first session is regarding the climate proofing sanitation, insights from the India's diverse ecological zones. So here I would like to request V.K. Madhavan, the former CEO of WaterAid India, to join the dais. He has led the WaterAid for over a decade and has played the vital role in shaping WaterAid's contribution to WASH. Thank you, Madhavan, for joining us today. It's our pleasure to have you here. Now I would be requesting the speakers for the panel, and I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Romit Sen, Senior Vice President Sustainability, HSBC India. Romit is a seasoned environment and sustainability professional with 20 plus years of experience in program development, implementation, monitoring and evaluation, action research, evidence-based advocacy, nature-based solutions, sustainable agriculture, climate action, and natural resource management. Thank you, Romit, for joining us. Now, I would request Mr. Sujoy Mazumdar, Senior WASH Specialist, UNICEF India, to join the panel. Mr. Sujoy joined as a director for the national flagship National Rural India Drinking Water Program in the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation, Government of India. Later, he joined UNICEF as a senior WASH specialist in New Delhi, and he provides technical assistance to the government's efforts in rural sanitation. Thank you, Mr. Sujoy, for joining us. I would request Ms. Alka Parecha, architect and researcher on the treated wastewater reuse, and she's director People in Center Consulting. Alka Parecha is an urban planner for training, is the founder of People in Center. For over 3 decades, she has been engaged in the management of water resource and services, working at the intersections of policy, practices, and community action. She has also been a fellow at the MIT USA. Thank you, Alka ji, for joining us. Now I request Ms. Akhila Shivadas, founder member, Center for Advocacy and Research, to join the panel discussion. Ms. Akhila Shivadas is founder member of Center for Advocacy and Research. She brings with her over 4 decades of experience as a development professional, researcher, and communication and advocacy expert. Thank you, Ms. Shivadas, for joining us. Last but not the least, Mr. Harshvardhan. He is the CEO CDD India. I request Mr. Harshvardhan to join the panel. Harshvardhan is the development professional with extensive experience across producers, owned collectives, governments, multilaterals, and grassroots NGOs. He has led large-scale development projects, contributed to national and state-level policy making, and holds a postgraduate degree in rural management from IRMA. Thank you, Mr. Harshvardhan, for joining us. So I request Mr. Madhavan to start the session plan, and at the end of the entire discussion for 15 minutes, we will open the panel to have the questions from our audience as well. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Anjali. I wonder what's worse, to have a session just before lunch or to have a session just after lunch. Either way, I think there's a slight risk. I'm delighted to have a sort of very diverse and experienced panel here today. I'm going to start off by setting sort of the context for this discussion, and then we'll invite each of the panelists to make some opening remarks in the first 5-7 minutes. And then we'll start to pose some questions to them to take this conversation forward. Yeah. We'll start off with just 2 or 3 broad points. The first is around the fact that if you were to take urban India, only 18% of our liquid waste generated by our cities actually gets treated prior to disposal. I think it's also important for us to recognize that only 50% of households in urban India are actually connected to sewer networks. So in some sense, our urban India has a huge problem around the quantum of liquid waste that it generates and its ability to actually manage that. If we were to look at rural India, a third of toilets constructed thus far, as per records of the Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation, are septic tanks. And another third of toilets constructed in rural India are single leach pit toilets. So in some sense, even rural India today has a huge problem around the quantum of fecal waste that is going to be generated that will require transportation, treatment, and management. If we were to then add to all of this the fact that the ambition of the Jal Jeevan Mission is to provide every household with a functional household tap connection, then the quantum of liquid waste that is going to be generated by every rural household is going to increase exponentially. And we're talking about villages where traditionally, it is now that we are witnessing a huge increase in sewer lines being laid in rural areas. But the reality is that in the absence of any treatment system, a lot of this liquid waste is likely to find its way into water bodies, which will then likely become cesspools of waste. So there is a rural as well as an urban context to this liquid waste management. If you add to all of this, the fact that climate change is imposing pressures on systems to manage and handle waste in ways that we can't even imagine. I mean, we heard earlier today about the fact that parts of Kolkata are flooded. But the fact is that this frequency at which these occurrences are taking place are just so frequent now that it brings into question whether the systems that we have designed for managing of our liquid waste, our sanitation infrastructure, are actually going to be able to withstand this stress of climate change, or whether we need to relook at how we are planning for all of this. We have diverse ecologies in this country. You have arid areas, you have areas that have a high, which are flood prone, which have a high water table. You have Kerala, right, and in the south, you have the Himalayan areas. And so in some sense, to assume that given climate change, the same sanitation solutions, design, and systems are likely to withstand the stress in every ecology is not necessarily a fair assumption. And so what we'll hope today is to hear from our diverse panelists and to get a sense and to have some takeaways about what is it that we can do to try and plan for a future which is sort of climate resilient and is able to withstand the stress of climate change as well. Thank you. Akhila, can I start with you? So if you could make some opening remarks and then we will.
Just to fall back on the set of questions that you shared with us, two set of questions I was asked to elaborate. One on this entire model of community and their participation, and particularly within that the model of a women-led governance structure. And what was very heartening is from the morning, of course, the ISC has been very much in the forefront of a lot of this innovation that's been happening, and particularly Ms. Kidwai referred to it as collaborative community-led sanitation. So in some sense, it's accepted. And it's not just for today, it's been accepted from the 50s. We had a visionary like Shri S.K. Dey, who was the first Union Minister for Panchayati Raj and Community Development, and his charter and his entire framework which resonates even today. So in that sense, we start with an advantage. And there is the former minister was also talking about the Jan Andolan. So in many sense, it's there all over, and there is an acceptance. And yet the devil lies in the details, and as you said, with climate. Now all of that looming, the threat and the hazards that are looming around us. And we are talking about in the urban context, we are talking about even after the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan started, and as late as 2018-19, when the first phase was wrapping up, the urban situation was still very stark, and of course starker in the informal slums and settlements. So the readiness at the level of safely managed, basic and safely managed sanitation was even lacking. And that continues to befuddle us. So what is it that we need to do to make a difference? Where does it all lie in? Where does the change, the levers of change, the stimulants of change, where does it lie? And it's very clear that there are three principles that are clearly emerging as the, what we call as the marathon sort of, leg of the, race. One, of course, is the communities most at risk. They are really the repositories of knowledge. It's lived experience, but also observations year after year. When we were children when I was young and living in Mumbai, the most enduring or the most reliable weather forecast would come from the milkman in the morning. He would tell you exactly where the wind was blowing and what was in store for us. So all of this, just observation year after year, and the ability to adapt, the ability to, bounce back, their resilience and their spirit is something that is, cannot be sort of underestimated. So that's one principle. The second principle is that with this climate threat, the integration of community institutions, not just, focal points, not just anchor persons, not just as touch points, but as institutions, need to be integrated and from start to finish, not as and when you want it, not as a tactical collaborator, but as somebody that is, that actually provides the foundational strength. And last but not the least, stop tinkering, stop doing piecemeal. Can we look seriously at what we call a human-centric design? Is this possible? Yes, it is possible, very much possible. And we saw it happening. We know that governments and, corporates, the big, let's say players in this sector play a very critical role. They set policies, they enrich the discourse, they catalyze, partnerships, all of that. But finally, it's the adage, you can take a horse to the pond, but how will you make it drink? That's where the community kicks in. And the whole structure is founded on building capacity, Madhavan, but capacity not of the doer, the thinker. The thinker itself is, limited in their understanding of the complexity. So the first thing we did as part of women's-led development is not just build capacity, but transfer knowledge. And knowledge is not just technical engineering, regulation, policy, program. It's also about, resilience. It's also about learning to cope and all the lived experiences, the social dynamics. What are the underlying causes for, lack of change or change? All of that intelligence comes from the community. And there's no way in which any of that can be, compromised with if we want to, build this entire sector. So first is capacity building. But more importantly, out of that capacity building, what do you create? How do you create community institutions? Clearly, whatever we have in the name of community development and community engagement gives you a very robust start. It gives you a sort of a structure on which, you can found whatever you're doing, whatever you're seeking to change or, enhance. But it's, woefully inadequate. It's not enough. You need, within the community institutions, you need a very strong ecosystem. You need strong consensus building. So what did we go about doing to ensure that, women and all the intersectionalities, not just women, of the entire intersectionalities of marginalized group actually leverage the opportunity of SBM, leverage it in the context of, underserved slums and in many cases informal, unauthorized slums. What did we do? We ensured that, we built what is called institutional, support to all the sort of, community platforms that the program had set. It is not about competition. It's not about us and them. It is about I, we, and us together. It is about the community itself becoming a stakeholder and influencing their peripheral, their very proximate, partners before they even go to the peripheral institutions. The institutions on the ground have to be strong. So we created them at 3 to 4 levels, at the slum level, at the ward level, and at the city level. At the city level, we had a multi-stakeholder forum. At the ward level, we had a, entity that was bringing everything together at an administrative level. And at the slum level, we had what is called a diverse, gender diverse, socially diverse group that actually kicked in leadership. And I think it is this kind of, institutional strengthening. We really now need to bring in community, not just merely as, instruments of some tinkering and change, but as an institutional partner. Collaborations like this, meetings like this should have a strong representation from those institutions, just as you have representations from corporate and other institutions. So unless this, thing is sort of moved, this, whatever element is not, taken or cognizance or not moved, I don't think, we are going to be, the kind of problems that you are citing in your opening remarks are going to be tackled at the level it needs to be.
Thanks, Akhila. We'll come back to you after this hearing from the others. I'd like to now invite Romit, maybe, to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Madhavan. I'll briefly touch upon what has been our approach of addressing the problem of climate resilience, impact, and sanitation from a more ecological lens. Some of my submission may sound out of syllabus, but perhaps because this is, a lot of what we have heard in the earlier sessions around collaboration and cooperation, I'll touch upon how perhaps, because I'm perhaps the only one who represents the CSR corporate social responsibility group within this panel, will also touch upon how we as an institution are looking at addressing some of these issues, not by project, but perhaps what's the ecological approach to channelize CSR grants to look at some of the solutions. I have also Harsh, who's been a partner in the initiative that we are doing in the Western Coast 4 states. So I'll and of course I'll not steal Harsh's thunder, but limit to some of my suggestions around how the topographic challenges and was unique to kind of address some of the problems. So why West Coast? Natasha did touch upon in her opening remarks. I think we've all heard of when it comes to incidences of extreme weather events on the East Coast, whether, beginning with the first impression has been the cyclone that hit Odisha in 1999. But of course, the data and analysis in the project over the last few years have shown an increasing trend around extreme weather events on the West Coast. If I were to just talk of Maharashtra, 720 kilometers of coastline, a lot of, economy that is being contributed through the cities and the ecosystem that is there. So whether it is extreme weather events, changes in temperature patterns was a key consideration for us to look at the West Coast. Why small towns? And perhaps, bringing in the aspect of investments that perhaps corporate social responsibility has been making. We are all, we hear different numbers. Of course, the projections of CSR for the financial year ending 23-24 is 30,000 crore. Maharashtra gets the largest share of it, almost 6,000. But if you look at the 6,000 crore share that Maharashtra gets from CSR investments, 4,000 crores goes to initiatives purely in Mumbai, Thane, and Pune. Maharashtra has got 279 census towns. So how, one of our first consideration when we looked at designing this project some 1,500 kilometers away from this location in Mumbai was that a lot is perhaps being happening or will continue to happen in the big cities, but how do you then look at smaller towns, cities with a population of 50,000, 60,000 who will perhaps be further growth engines in the coming time. So then of course narrowing down how you channelize CSR investments into smaller cities, but then of course giving in this whole consideration of ecology. There was vulnerability along the West Coast. We of course, this was a CSR program, so how do you channelize CSR initiatives in regions where perhaps grants have not flown in. So that kind of made us come to this whole approach of looking at the Climate Resilient Coastal Cities Program, which was a partnership anchored by India Sanitation Coalition, CDD, IIT, and supported by us at HSBC India. So this was largely around the motivation and thinking how you looked at. And again, when I said the solution bit, what perhaps not looking at one models across, few towns, but how Can a landscape ecology provide us evidence which can then, as you said, 15 ecological regions in a country, but how the problems of water sanitation perhaps are similar with unique challenges across different ecological region. But if we are able to understand the topography, hydrology, climatology, do a rigorous assessment of the interconnectedness of the various environmental parameters and develop solutions, we thought that could be a case to take forward. I'll stop by lastly saying that with this whole aspect of climate impact on wash and wash impacting the climate, so it's a vicious cycle. Some of our work began and with perhaps a more mitigation response, where we looked at utilities who had a large share of their revenues going in for energy cost. We said that okay, why not look at solar solutions which can build down their cost. But we realized that, of course, perhaps was relatively easier and you could have more measurable impacts within a shorter span of time to convince your stakeholders and your boards around the impact of your investment. When we looked at the adaptation side of it, which is largely around the work that we are doing now, we realized that one, of course, some of the KPIs which we would kind of set up would not come in that specific time frame. I know not many of us don't like it, but perhaps when it kind of measuring the impact of our investments, that's something we look at. But yes, it was easy, perhaps relatively easy to work on the mitigation response. As we work on the adaptation response to break that vicious cycle of how climate change impact wash services and how wash services contribute to the emissions through the climate, I think our and we are still learning, and I'm sure Harsh will also touch upon some of the examples, is that how a combination of adaptation and mitigation response perhaps is the way forward to address some of the vulnerabilities of any region, in particular the case that we are doing on small towns on the western coast.
Thanks very much, Romit. So it's interesting. So we started off by listening to Akhila talking about the need, the problems particularly of people residing in informal settlements in urban areas, and about the need to build their capacity, their institutions, to create agency for them. You've added this dimension of looking at vulnerability around coastal areas, and also this important issue of small towns per se. Let me switch to Alka Ben, and because she in some sense is looking at this relationship between both urban and rural as one continuum. And so if you could start off with some opening remarks before.
Thank you for inviting me here. I'm glad I'm here to share my views. Thanks especially to Madhavan. Climate resilience sanitation insight from different ecological zones of India. What does it tell us? It tells us that ecologies differ in India, and therefore there are arid regions, there are coastal regions, there are mountains, and there are plains. So sanitation requirements are different. As we know, in flood-prone areas of Bihar, you require toilets which do not really, when floods occur, do not mix with groundwater. Similarly, in places like Rajasthan, you require dry toilets because there is no water to really flush and forget. In the areas which are cyclone prone, whether it is in Orissa or somewhere, we have seen in 2015 after the Fani cyclone that everything was devastated and there was lot of damage. Actually, there was lot of retrofitting which had to be done in those areas that time, with toilets also. There are areas like Ghed in Saurashtra, which are also flood prone. Every year there would be floods and the issue of sanitation and groundwater contaminations remain. Now these are rural situations. Rural situations suffer more because of financial and technological constraints. Urban situations also differ a lot. In Mumbai, for example, because of floods, sewers overflow, drains overflow, and we see every year in Mithi River, it converts into a sewer line. Similarly, we have seen that in floods in Chennai, there was devastation. There was actually outbreak of disease in 2015, I guess, yeah. 2015, there was outbreak of disease. When I went there, stench was terrible. And when I came back, I heard about the disease outbreak there. So rural areas and urban areas differ a lot. added to the ecology, the status, whether it is urban or rural, matter a lot. I will come to it more so because urban areas are politically and economically much, much stronger than rural areas. Assured water supply, almost assured water supply is there for urban areas. So therefore sanitation is different, and sanitation itself cannot stand alone in urban areas. You require to see drainage, you require to see treatment systems, whereas in rural areas that is not the case. In urban areas, water supply, it's a desperate situation because as population is growing, they are desperate to get water by any means to urban areas. From where? From rural areas or hinterlands. So you have pipelines, you have canals, you have even groundwater reserved borewells dug in rural areas supplying water to urban areas. Examples are in Rajkot, examples are in Chennai. There's a lot of literature written on it. Now what happens after that water is consumed by urban areas? Wastewater is produced, which is, as a thumb rule, it is 80% of water which is consumed. And what happens to that wastewater? That wastewater eventually is either disposed in canals or water bodies or on soil or in a natural gradient flows back to rural areas. And what happens afterwards? Actually, I was tracking this wastewater for almost a decade now. What happens to the wastewater which is disposed by a city? In most of the states of India which are arid, what I observed is this wastewater doesn't go really waste. It is being used by farmers all along, whether it is treated, untreated or mixed. It is being used except for probably Gangetic plains where water levels are very, very high. We do not recognize these farmers, but farmers have really recognized the value of this wastewater. They have recognized it, and whether it is treated, untreated, mixed, whatever it is valuable for them. The crop production with this water is many folds more. My calculations tell me that it is around the difference between freshwater cultivation and wastewater cultivation, the profit margin increases by 4,000 rupees per hectare. So that's a lot. Another thing is that, as Madhavan was saying, that sewer lines are, water pipelines are going to be increasing with Jal Jeevan Mission. Now, if that is going to happen, that means that more and more water will be collected and disposed and will flow back. So, is there a plan to actually use this water? The best use, the best way water can be treated is not putting it in water bodies, but putting it in soil. So, how do we do that? The best way probably is farmers have been doing it for years and centuries now. So sewage farms were there all over India. In cantonment areas, Britishers had established those. And now in some of the cities and some of the states, I have seen this rural-urban partnerships emerging because cities do not know what to do with the quantity of production of this wastewater, which is huge. We cannot imagine how much is the quantity. Whatever efforts we do, we might be able to reuse 1, 2 or 3% maximum within the city itself in parks or recreation or other uses. Most of the use would be in farming once it is disposed. And that's the story not only in India, it's all over the world. The basically reuse of wastewater is for irrigation. But for India, probably it's time that we do it in a planned way rather than the way it is happening by default. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alka. We'll come back to you with some specific questions on that. If I just quickly move to Sujoy for some opening remarks, and then Harsh before we take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Madhavan. I was just hearing the speaker speaking, and I think excellent inputs. So I've been very fortunate to be a part of the Swachh Bharat mission right from the starting. It's 15 years, and we have seen the end of phase 1 in 2019 and the end of phase 2, which is now ending. There have been huge achievements. I mean, we are a country with 180 million rural households. When the Swachh Bharat mission started, 100 million households did not have a facility. We have managed to provide huge investment by government. I mean, unparalleled 150,000 crores in phase 1 and another 100,000 crores in phase 2. Looking back now, there, as I said, there have been successes, but at hindsight, there are challenges that now we see. One, you mentioned, Madhavan, on technology. We looked at India as one system where one solution fits all. And it's now beginning to hit us. As you said, this septic tank, there are 600 million septic tanks in India. 60 million, sorry. 60 million septic tanks in India. And how they will be emptied and how the fecal sludge will be treated, we have no clue. So that's a challenge. The other speaker spoke about diversity, geographical, physiographical. You spoke about grey water. Soak pits are being built across India, whether it's in Bengal, where the soak pits don't work as compared to Rajasthan. So solutions that the Swachh Bharat Mission envisaged did not look particularly at the local requirement. And unfortunately, unlike in phase 1, in phase 2, local innovations has not been encouraged, or let me say has not come up by itself. And therefore, we're struggling to see the whole solid liquid waste management systems working. The second point, climate stress experts have spoken, they are hurting our sanitation systems. Bengal, my home in Bengal is today under 1.5 feet of water. It is not, the water is not flowing out. Why? All the drains are choked. The Ganga is flowing very high because of siltages. There is no program of deepening the Ganga. Water is not flowing out. I mean, if the rain does not stop, you are in trouble. So whether it's Gurgaon or it's Mumbai or it's Kolkata, it's a major issue of drainage. The third point I want to say, the failure of the Swachh Bharat Mission, or I would call it failure, the gaps, women and marginalized groups are left out. The people with special abilities, there is no provision, even though the ministry has instructions, but in the ground, implementation is not there. Access, figures say that 5% of India's population has some kind of special ability. And the Swachh Bharat Mission does not recognize their existence. And it is sad, and we need to do something about it. Panchayats and communities are key actors to deal with this issue. The issue of operation maintenance, I think, was spoken. Where does the funds for the operation maintenance come from? The government of India has said that we will not pay for operation maintenance. State governments, because of their own compulsions, don't want to charge user charges. How does this work? The only solution I see, and thanks to ISC for looking at this, professionalization of the sanitation sector has to come up. We cannot depend upon government funding for sanitation. So how can we advocate with the government to include this at the part of their SBMG 3.0? I mean, it's under consideration now and it is being discussed. Cross-sectoral thinking has to happen. Personally, I feel going forward, the private sector and the corporate sector has a very big role to play in SBMG 3.0. Financing and planning need to speak to each other. We bring out the JMP report every alternate year, Joint Monitoring Program, and India is a flashpoint there. Even though we have had plenty of successes, fecal sludge management, which is the focus point of the Joint Monitoring Program, which looks at the SDGs, says that India is lagging behind. 60% of India is still not safely managed for sanitation and for water. So there are areas that we need to work on, and we're looking at inputs from this kind of discussion to feed into SBMG 3.0. Stop here.
Thanks, Sujoy. Finally, Harsh for some opening remarks before we...
Thanks, Madhavan. So I will start with some basic numbers. We all know that 97% of the all water in the world is saline. We can't use for drinking and potable purposes. 2% is frozen in ice caps and Antarctica. 1% is the water which is available on surface and in groundwater. And whatever water we have, we are contaminating it with wastewater or used water. So that is the basic premise we start with. As Alka said, that whatever water we use at our home, 80% of that turns into wastewater. However, there is another hidden user of water within the household. It is the energy. And each middle class consumes about 4 times the water, 3 to 4 times what we use for our domestic needs. So that is another source of water which is getting lost to the coal-based power plants, which results into greenhouse emission. And as we are talking about the mitigation part. So one part is that water is being used for energy, is being used for our household use, which is leading to greenhouse emission. On the other hand, sanitation sector alone is estimated to contribute 4 to 5% of global greenhouse gas emission. And that is the case when Madhavan was saying about 50% of urban India getting connected to sewage lines. About 3/4 of 70 to 75% of world population is still not connected to sewer lines. So if you go the same path, the greenhouse emissions are going to significantly increase more. So we have to look for new ways of solving these problems. Of course, this is just I talked about mitigation. Once we come to adaptation, it is still more a tougher nut to crack, which in the course of questions and answers, I think Madhavan has prepared for us. I will reflect upon and share my thoughts on that. But the thing is that business as usual, if it goes, it has got a huge implication on global greenhouse emission, and it may again create a vicious cycle for us. Thank you.
So Harsh, let me start with you because you had to wait the longest to make your opening remarks. How is climate change going to impact sanitation infrastructure? Do we have a problem? And if climate change is going to adversely impact sanitation infrastructure, then what are some ways to be able to either postpone or evade this crisis?
So let us start with how the sanitation sector generally works. When we talk about the conventional system, they are basically aerobic systems. This means we use a huge amount of energy to pump air into the treatment systems, and they break down the waste, and then the waste is treated. So that is the basic premises which we use. As the temperature will go up, which we project might go 1%, 1 degree, 2 degree, 2.5, whatever it goes, the level of oxygen in the water which is dissolved reduces. This will require far further and higher amount of oxygen pumping. This would require higher energy consumption. That is as the temperature increases. Now second part is the rainfall increase or change in variability in the rainfall, changing intensity of rainfall. So if you have got less water, if you have got water stress which we feel which emerge, then our sewage systems are based on conveyance mechanism on hydraulic pressure. If you do not have hydraulic pressures, your systems will not work. Second, most of our systems are combined system, which includes sewage system as well as the storm water. So if the intensity is increasing, the systems will overwhelm and they will fail, and which are there happening in, Sujay just talked about it happening in Calcutta. So this is not only question of Calcutta, this is going to happen everywhere else also. So that is the second problem. So once your basic systems are out of that because of increasing, I would say intensity of rainfall, decreasing intensity of rainfall, decreasing rainfall patterns, your temperature increase. Third part is the cyclonic activities. So as cyclonic activity and the coastal areas are more vulnerable to it. Most of our system, pumping system, treatment system are energy based. Now if the cyclonic system somehow disrupts your energy distribution systems, whether in a single wire falls, then whole distribution and treatment system goes to a tailspin. Nothing works. And then you have got basic systems not working in a city, and you can realize and imagine what is going to happen to that city. And any restoration and reactivating the system has got its own gestation time and its own sweet time to restart and treating. So that is the third major problem. Fourth major problem is, which we don't implicitly realize, is the sea level rise. Now we feel that this 20 centimeter, 50 centimeter or 1 meter, what is going to impact to us? Because once we start a marine drive on Bombay, you see the sea level is 3 meter down. And so yes, sometimes the storm surges happen, cyclonic activities happen, the water comes on the road. But we have done some dam analysis of the major cities in India, and the data which is there is slightly worrying. So we have got two situations. One situation is that when the business goes as usual, then what happens? The sea level rise, and what is the area which is going to get affected. Secondly, if we go for the path of aggressive economic growth, what is going to happen? So in climate change terminology, they are called SPSS 2 to 4.5, and second one is called SSP 5 to 8.5. So these are normal and aggressive situations. So let us see for Mumbai. So if we go for business as usual, then by next 15 years, sea level rise by 19.5%, and the area which is going to impacted is about 727 square kilometer. So major part of our economic city is going to go down and get affected by the any natural event, and that will hit our sanitation system. So that is for 20 centimeter. If we go for 2080, or suppose we go for 2040, so I talk about 2040, if you go to 2060, that is going to 35 cm rise. The area going to affect is 826 square kilometer. If we go to 2100, about 75 years now, the temperature is the sea level is going to increase by 76 centimeter. The area under inundation is going to be 1055 square kilometer. So this is heart of our financial system, which is going to be get under threat of not providing enough sanitation services to its citizens. And this is not only a case of Mumbai, this will also happen on the eastern coast, and all our major cities are under threat. And this all analysis has been done on DEM model, digital elevation model, in which we see that what is the gap, what is the depression, what is the height, and if the sea level increases, how it is going to affect the coastline. So it may seem a far, and because humans are this is our inborn limitation, that we react very immediately. We perhaps do not have that foresight to plan for 50 years, 75 years, and sometimes we have that patience our systems. But this is a threat which is there, which is documented, and which is going to happen. How we cope up with that is the challenge which exists with us now. Thank you.
Harsh has said enough to give us sleepless nights for a long time. Sujoy, you talked about SBM 3.0. What do you see, what needs to happen for SBM 3.0 to recognize some of these challenges around climate change, to be able to help build resilience, adaptation in this country?
First of all, the SBMG 3.0 should accept that the climate change effects will affect water and sanitation services. Unfortunately, globally, we are going in the opposite direction. There are many countries in the world, in fact, now the US says that there is no effect of climate change. So there is a thought that says that climate change is not real, and even if it happens, it does not have a large impact on the population. So the first thing the SBMG 3.0 needs to recognize that climate change exists and affects WASH. Unfortunately, again in India, unlike in many other countries, so if you look at our adjoining countries in Bangladesh and Pakistan, climate change is under the Ministry of Water and Sanitation. In India, it is not. It is under the Ministry of Environment and Forest. And therefore, there is a complete non-connect between the two ministries. SBMG 2.0 did not speak about climate change. So SBMG 3.0 has, number one. Number two, the NDMA already has identified areas which are under risk for climate change. And that needs to be taken on board in the Swachh Bharat mission, and infrastructure created in these areas need to be provided the additional resources that are needed to make the systems resilient. I don't mean only infrastructure, but also the processes that are being followed. Just to tell you that UNICEF, under the advice from the ministry, we did a study oblique work to look at what needs to be strengthened in those areas. So we looked at facilities, individual household latrines, as well as certain other community toilets, and certain other SLW infrastructure. And we found that if you need to make it climate resilient, the normal elevated structures or RCC structure, stronger roofs, cyclone proof, then you need an additional cost of 40 to 50% depending on the structure. So we have given in a concept paper to the ministry to say that you need to say that in these areas you will have additional funds. Thirdly, there has to be strong operation maintenance. Unfortunately here, I'll strongly reiterate, we are very good in building. We are very poor in maintaining. In fact, I've seen many places, it is easier to build another structure. I've seen it in Madhya Pradesh. They have overhead reservoirs, usme crack ho gaya. They prefer to build a new overhead reservoir than to repair that one. Because the political leadership prefers that mera flag hoga, mera plaque hoga, naya. So, and engineers also prefer rebuilding. So, there has to be a focus on operation maintenance. And secondly, I would say that people have to pay. I mean, of course, you can look at affordability and other, but to say that water and sanitation only will be given through government resources, I think India must be one of the only countries in the world which says that the government will provide you full services of water and sanitation. These 4 or 5 things are essential, I think, going forward.
Thanks, Sujal. Akhila, I noticed you were also itching to respond to what Harsh had said. But just to add to that, so you talked about the need to build local institutional capacity, to provide them with knowledge and agency. But given the current play of our urban local bodies, what do you think needs to happen at a policy level to get them to start to address this? And what else do we need to do to build in vulnerability assessment as part of our planning design?
Correct. So, firstly, I think somewhere we are in a crosswire. At one level, we are, quite strongly supporting or enabling communities. It's not like communities are being ignored or underestimated. And political parties and political actors are very, very, sensitive about all that. And there are enough checks and balances for anybody who's working in the actual ground. So at one level, it is there. But at another level, the issues of sustainability are never really explored. There's a very linear understanding कि आप यहाँ पर तैयार करोगे, फिर you'll do here. That kind of, an hierarchy is created. And then the communities are the trickle effect. You build your SBM toilets hurriedly, so that you get your numbers for open defecation free. The first Fani cyclone in 20 smashes all of them in Bhubaneswar. And I shudder to think what is happening in the closer, coastal towns. So, that element is never looked at. If that element has to be looked at, then a whole very robust, institutional processes have to happen. And it has been demonstrated time and again. And the question is not about scale. Scale and localization are reconcilable. They are not, antithetic to each other. They can be achieved. Why? Because your element of people is the scale of conversation, the scale of community consultation, the scale of audits, the scale of micro planning. All of that can be built in. And there are no costs. There are only people working. And, repeatedly we have told communities, don't, see your institutionalization in the form of a paid honorarium. Please reject it. Your institutionalization will emerge when you become a stakeholder and get a seat at the table, not, token seat, proper seat. So all of this is there. There's rich, testimonies on the ground. But there is, there's at the policy level, the seriousness towards decentralization, devolution, not stop with the 3rd tier, go up to the 7th tier. Alka talked about rural, urban. All of that, where will it come? The key actors will be people. And we have seen, they learned from the SBM toilets, and they constructed their own elevated toilets, not in 2s, 3s, but in thousands, because they understood They understood the, peril to them and their children and their families and their dear ones. So it's just all of that is completely underexplored, Madhavan. And a lot of, tut-tutting goes on, but no real action to, involve the community. So the SBM3 should really seriously look at that level of devolution. The states and the federal governments, in fact, pride themselves in keeping the urban local bodies under their discipline, their jurisdiction, their technology, their capacity. It's that, is going to not, do the necessary, not going to be prove beneficial in the long run. You're going to have a few champions, and that system, second suggestion, that system, what they call the steel frame, the iron frame system, all are birds of passage. They come for 2 years. The first year they do nothing. Second year they warm up. Third year they are withdrawing. There's nothing that is happening. There is no institutional memory. Who has the institutional memory? The communities. And you don't nurture them. You don't, allow them to sort of emerge from the shadows of, all of this, semi-feudal and, modern structures. There's still, many of it's very semi-feudal. I mean, you're not going to go very far. You're going to make very cosmetic changes.
Rohit, so we've heard about what we're faced with. We heard about the fact that there are some opportunities that SBM 3.0 can offer for rural areas, but we have a huge gap in terms of institutional capacity. But as someone who represents an organization which has invested in climate sustainability or climate resilience, what do you sort of see? What needs to happen if we're looking at greater CSR investment in climate vulnerable areas? You described this anomaly in Maharashtra where, what you said, 4,000 or 6,000 crores flows only to Mumbai, Thane and Pune, right? Now, if you're talking about shifting capital to climate vulnerable areas for looking at adaptation, resilient solutions, what needs to change? What incentives? Do you need incentives? Do you need, what's required to shift capital across space and time?
Sure, thanks. And perhaps I'll pick up from the point, Shujoy, that you mentioned and others touch upon is, and of course this could be a debate whether climate change is real or not. But you said that climate change and WASH perhaps difficult to fathom. You may have data, empirical evidence. Harsh spoke of the modeling. The way we looked at it, perhaps because it was not only about designing a CSR project, but it was also about work, engaging in convincing our board, who play an important role in the decisions that we make. So while there could be argument, of course, in this room across the world around climate change impacts on WASH, we thought the entry point will be people. Because what will matter to the political class, what will matter to everybody will be the impact on people and their livelihoods. Life and livelihoods perhaps is something that concerns all of us. While investing through our programs on the engagements that we have had, and even if, as you said, if you were to catalyze or direct more CSR capital, I think while the framing, the framing in a more larger sense could very well be climate, but when we go to specifics in actually identifying what it will mean, kya karoge, kiske liye karoge, usse kya hoga, where perhaps we'll have to come down to the level of people, to the level of livelihoods. And through the project that we are currently doing with ISC and others, we felt that while of course the entry point was vulnerability of the West Coast and looking at solutions that can help in water, wastewater management, there was a very strong livelihood connect. The cities that we are working, Malvan, Guhagar, Alibag, and along the coasts, there's a livelihood angle. Pollution has a direct impact on fisheries. Fisheries is such a strong component of the livelihood of the people in that region. Biodiversity, it was, timing perhaps was right that Natasha, when we conceptualized the program, the budget had made the announcement of the Mishti program, which was largely around mangrove conservation. But I think looking at this whole, approach of one, climate, as I said, could be a, cover, but within which aspects that relate to people, their survival, their livelihoods, around biodiversity, perhaps was, the key which helped us to frame the narrative, which you could then, create to not only develop projects, identify impact, but also then advance the learning agenda, for the sector. I mean, we are talking of corporate social responsibility, and I have no challenge in admitting that perhaps a lot more needs to be done to make collaborative corporate social responsibility by clearly advancing the learning agenda. And Natasha, that's perhaps one thing we have spoken. Your initiatives that the ISC does is perhaps bringing that collaborative CSR. But I think bringing in, and also Madhavan, the last point that I would like to make is that when one is looking at investments through CSR, there is always the consideration of how long should my investments be. Short term, so defining short term, medium term outcomes, which also helps in convincing your own internal stakeholders, but also kind of keeping on track the focus that yes, something will take a long time, which will perhaps need larger investments, but perhaps there are more critical milestones and achievements that can be made in the short to medium term, which is useful to justify as a project which perhaps will channelize more capital to these interventions. So in summary, I think the 3 points around: one, the narrative that it is about protecting nature, protecting people, protecting livelihoods, protecting biodiversity. It is about building resilient communities, which, and lastly, more as a corporate, that it also aligns with your sustainability priorities around doing good for, people and planet. Those perhaps will be the key considerations.
So Romit, one of the things that Sujoy also talked about was the fact that it's easy to create infrastructure. But if you don't find ways of ensuring that that infrastructure is operated, maintained, then you end up with a problem, right? So, a lot of CSR tends to be for creation of new infrastructure. Is there a way to make a case for CSR to also help operate, maintain existing infrastructure that's been created?
Yes, I think the fundamental questions also stems from the fact when you ask that, because everybody would want impact of their investment, but people would equally want that the impact and the legacy is sustained. So when the board comes to, when we present a project and the board asks us, say if we were to look at the solar, as I said, we looked at the mitigation side of it through investments in solar for reducing the cost of power. The first question was, 2 साल बाद अगर हमको वहाँ ले जाओगे क्या वो सोलर रहेगा? And we said that very valid question, but I think to address that, we'll perhaps look at 2 or 3 approaches. One was, and I'll come to how perhaps there have been some examples how we work with the utilities and the institutions and the communities. The first part was also to work with the private service providers. Because whenever there was a, like a capex, and we are not talking about large grey infra, but even for this, whenever there is a large capex infrastructure call, people were willing, private parties were willing to come and do that, whether it was solar and others. But and we are talking of towns which are, 400 kilometers from Mumbai. Whenever there was, how does an institution, whether it is a non-profit who's doing a project or even smaller municipal Nagar Panchayat, Zilla Council, how do they develop the tender? What are the terms of condition that they set up for the private party to do AMC? Those are things that we felt, are very important to kind of look at some of the cost, and mindful, we are, as my organization, we are mindful that we'll have to bear it, because if I have to convince my board कि 3 साल बाद वो दिखेगा या नहीं, you will have to perhaps make certain investments in the short term around O&M, around AMCs, which you will have to work out with the service providers. That's one. The other part was largely around working with, the utilities and the communities, where some model, as I said, like in Ecological, where we've looked at user fee, but that is linked to a tight schedule. Whether we have looked at O&M as CSR, I mentioned in the earlier part of the work, but also around product, and of course, there are more eminent people who have a better understanding, perhaps me, on the water sector. We have seen in some of the cities that we have worked that the services around water, wastewater, sanitation are perhaps, when it is outsourced to different parties. But if there's one party who's doing it, perhaps that could help in bring in certain kind of conformity. And the last, point is around as I said, livelihood is important. There are huge, Shujoy, you spoke about national schemes, but even say state level schemes, Majhi Vasundhara in, Maharashtra, where they say that, how can people within smaller towns and cities link. So the whole model of NULM, can there be opportunities on how SHGs can look at models of even maintaining solar, panels, maintaining urban forest. So again, if you were to link it with livelihood and community linked livelihoods, perhaps that could be one aspect, and convergence with schemes could be one aspect of addressing some of the zone elements.
Thanks very much, Romit. So, Alka, you've made this case for looking at sort of reducing of looking at this relationship between water in urban and rural, right? That to meet drinking water needs, you transport fresh water from rural areas to meet the requirements of urban water. And therefore, there's a moral case for treated water to be made available to rural areas. In your experience, are people willing to pay for it? Is this, are we still at the point of only looking at it anecdotally, or do we have enough evidence across multiple areas to suggest that this can actually become a reality for every urban settlement which makes available treated water back to rural areas?
Thanks for this question. It's really of interest. The reuse of wastewater stops at payments. How can we generate revenues which we have spent in treating it? But when we get fresh water for our use, do we pay? Are we paying? When you want to sell wastewater because you want to get the money back of treatment, you have used it. But when you got fresh water for your own consumption, have you paid? At most of the cities are defaulting on water payments to water resource department. Almost all, including big cities, including rich cities like my city, Ahmedabad, or other cities which are quite rich. Municipalities are quite rich, they don't pay. They don't pay for fresh water, but they want to now once that fresh water comes into the city's territory, does it become theirs? Is it theirs? How does it become theirs that they want to generate revenue by selling wastewater? That is the first and primary question. I'm really evoking rights for cities, here. I'm saying that cities entitlements are not only of the dwellers of cities. The entitlements are also of the claimants who are outside the cities because they are providing for cities. So again, ecosystem services are being talked about for a very long time. Where are those when we talk of user payments? User payment only of, maintenance and operation, not of getting the water who is giving you services for the very basis of water. So that's the first question. When you consider users' charges, you need to consider everything to be fair and just. You cannot only think of operation and maintenance. That's the first question. Second part, cities have been trying because they are mandated to sell wastewater to highest bidders probably so that they can generate revenues. Electricity operation costs are high of treatment, whatever are the costs. But on the other hand, at the very source, if the pollutants are not mixed together, then probably treatment costs would be cheaper. Have we thought of treatment technologies which are cheaper? Because I really don't think right now CPCB has given a blanket standards for treatment. But if the uses are defined for irrigation use, actually you really do not require to treat it to secondary level. Even primary treated water where BOD is 30 is okay for irrigation. So why do you want to treat it to 10 level where your costs are increasing so much? Why do you want to do it? But because there is a NGT ruling, because CPCB, NGT ruling, but it's not enacted. It's not enacted. So nobody can hold a municipality responsible unless and until there is a court case that they are not treating to 30 level, to 10 level. So your cost of treatment can really come down. If you think of the reuse right in the beginning, there are states which are doing it. Punjab, for example, they are supplying wastewater, treated wastewater, right from STPs to farms. As in Punjab, everything farmers are empowered. So there it is free. Even canal water is free there. So wastewater, treated wastewater is supplied from STP to fields, and 64 STPs are supplying water which is irrigating around 24,000 acres of land, which is a huge irrigation project. It's bigger than Narmada Dam irrigation. So that's the kind of water which is generated. So secondly, when you are talking about revenue, again selling and buying, a marketplace for wastewater, there are cases of institutionalizing it. Farmers are ready to pay, but as much what they are paying for irrigation water. And I have found cases in many cities of Gujarat, especially because Gujarat, is at a forefront of cooperative movement. So there are wastewater users cooperative like lift irrigation societies in Gujarat, which are not new, which are 50, 60 years old and running today also. Running very well, and there are contracts between these farmers cooperatives and cities. They are supplying wastewater to these farmers, and farmers are paying for it diligently. But cities are under pressure that any day when they get bigger revenue, which they are trying but failing to get, they would shift that water to industries, which is, again, it's a justice question, an equity question.
Thanks, Alka. So, Harsh, Alka making an interesting case here, right? What she's saying is, let's be clear about what you're going to do with the wastewater that you have. And if you're clear about what its end use is going to be, then potentially your cost of treatment can come down dramatically, right? Now, within all of this, given also the fact that there is an energy footprint that goes into treating wastewater, and given CDD's own experience, there's this belief that nature-based solutions could possibly offer some solutions moving ahead. Do you see this as a realistic option for being scaled up across the diverse ecologies of this country?
So, Madhavan, thank you for this question. Before attempting your question and answering your query, I would like to also bring one fact: why nature-based solutions? So, nature has been treating waste for millions of years without any machine. That is how human society has evolved. Second way, even the Royal Commission of Sewerage, which set up the standards for effluents in world for the first time in 1915, they said that wherever you have got sufficient dilution, there is no need to treat it, because the nature will take care of it. So that is the second part. Third part comes from the community ownership part. Once we make anything complex, we take it away from the community. That is the basic nature of technology. Any complex technology will take the power of managing and supervising it away from the community. So that is the fundamental issue. So an ORS, just for an example, every household in most of the women now know that just you have to mix 1 spoon of sugar, a little bit of salt, and ORS is ready. So that is hardly, if you go in your home, it is 20 paisa product. You package it in ORS, it becomes 20 rupees. So the technology also divides. It also has got the power to alienate. And that is one of the fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves. Who is owning this technology and for whom? A clear example in global arena, we have got NPT treaty, non-proliferation treaty. The 5 superpowers which had nuclear bomb, they decided no other will have that. And there are various reactions against that. So let's not assume that technology is all pervading, it lifts all. Its benefits are also disproportionately distributed according to who holds the power over the technology. And that is where the nature-based solution comes in, that we try to adopt the technology over which the communities themselves have the power to manage and supervise this. And that having said, so let us go for example of India. Now first thing is that we have got about 8 to 10 states, northeastern and western Himalaya and western Ghats, where the territory is so undulating that if you go for conventional system, our pumping cost and treatment cost are going to be huge. That is the first task. Second thing is that 50 or 55% of India still lives in, or 60% of India still lives in villages, where we do not have that financial muscle to pull this off, of capex of putting sewage lines and treatment system. It is just not there. Third point is that out of suppose 7,500 municipalities in this country, hardly 100 are able to cover their cost. Rest will have to depend on some external source of funding, which may or might not come. Again, that shifts the power from the USLBs to somebody else. So these are complex realities wherein we exist. And then again, depending upon, yes, but I am not saying that nature-based solutions will remain a solution for every context, because nature-based solution, like all other solutions, they are not panacea. They also have their limitations. Just for example, like we say that if the density of population goes above 1500 people per square kilometer, we ourselves will say that go for a conventional system, because you might not have a space, your density population is high, and if urbanization creates enough economic opportunity, let people pay for this. So this is where, but I see the solutions being, the nature being can be implemented the majority or vast majority of our country. Yes, those 50 or 100 cities which are highly dense, those highly dense areas, we may look for conventional system and otherwise, but generally, in general, these systems can be applicable and implemented in most of the country.
Many thanks, Harsh. I'd like to just open this up. If there are any questions from members of the audience, you've all been very patient. I can see some hands. If someone can help with some mics that can be transferred.
The mics are next to you. Just have to press the red button, please.
So if you start from there, on the left.
Sir, thanks for giving this opportunity. Sir, I am from Nirgand Private Limited, and we are one of the pioneer companies in biodigester solutions. And Sujoy sir mentioned that there are some of the not around 60 million septic tanks that are need to be treated. And similarly, Harshvardhan sir also pointed out there are lots of households which are not connected to the sewage line. So just my question is that because we are in the same department, so we just want to just explore or know, we just want to know actually that how decentralized solution can be useful in this. Like because in this decentralized solution with biodigester which using anaerobic bacteria, how could this be useful in that? Because it will be lightning for us also as a company.
Thank you. We'll just take one more question and then we'll maybe take groups of 2 or 3 questions at a time. Yeah.
Hello. Respected dignitaries, experts on the podium, delegates and award participants, very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Bhati Yaqub. I come from Jammu and Kashmir. I'm an independent economist. There are many questions after listening to this wonderful audience, these speakers. There are many questions in the mind, but I will be very much particular, taking care of time. 2 questions are there, in my mind. If we look at the economic perspective with regard to sanitation in India, from 2014-15 onwards, we have seen a rising trend in the budget allocations in this sector. I have some facts to share. In 2014-15, there was a budget allocation of 2,841 crores, and it increased to 16,888 crores 17-18 data. From the inception of this conclave, I have heard many speakers saying that there's a failure at different levels. The reason is that there is lack of funds. But what the actual document, that is the budget, shows us that the budget allocation is huge. No matter it is very much less percentage of the overall GDP what India has. What is this dilemma between allocation and utilization all about? I want to get an answer regarding this. Number 1 question. Number 2 is that I have been working with many NGOs in J&K. There was a project which was undertaken by my elder brother. He was an NCC cadet. He had a project of cleaning his area and make a video and send it to the ministry, for which he received an award. After this event, I got an interest in sanitation, and obviously when we come through different phases of life, we at one point of time we understand what is sanitation is all about, and this environment, ecology, different literature, we come close and we understand the basic importance of all these things. So, considering these all facts, there was this scheme is also applicable in J&K also. What we have seen is that J&K comes under one of the if we look at the defecation system in India, there are some states where open defecation system is huge, and J&K is one of the states where you have huge open defecation systems. What the government does is that it started this program of giving money to the people.
Can you focus on the question,
Yeah,
please?
making toilets. There is this thing that is the government is providing 12,000 per household to make a toilet, to construct a toilet in particular. So if you look at presently, is it fair enough? 12,000 rupees is fair enough for a household to construct a toilet? Thank you very much.
So, I don't know, Sujoy, Harsh, do you want to take these? The first question is around, given that there are 60 million septic tanks in rural India, are biodigesters or decentralized solutions the way forward?
I think Harsh can take that because he's the expert on it.
Do you want to take that?
So you can go to CDD India website and you can find a number of publications on fecal sludge management, how to design FSTPs, and even how to design all the guidelines are available there. You can have a look at it. Second, you talked about anaerobic digestion. So there is a book by Ludwig Sasse, Decentralized Wastewater Treatment Systems, and it is also available online. So you can just go through and read it.
So Sujoy, two questions. One is about people on the one hand talking about lack of funds being a constraint, but on the other hand there's been huge public investment in sanitation. So what's this dichotomy? Is there really a problem with funds, or is there a problem in utilization? What's the issue? And the second is very specific: is 12,000 adequate as an incentive to build a halfway decent toilet?
Okay, so I'll do the second one first. 12,000 was the amount which was decided by the government of India to give as incentive, not as the cost of construction. It was an incentive to some specific households in rural India to help them build their toilet. It was not for everybody. It was not for APL, for example, but people found a way around it and got the 12,000. It is not the construction cost. Can you build a facility in 12,000 in Jammu and Kashmir possibly? I'm sure you cannot. But it was not supposed to be the total amount of the cost. It was always supposed to be an incentive. So that is answer to your second question. The first one, yes, huge amount has been spent. As I said, SBM phase 1 was around 150,000 crores. SBM phase 2, another 100,000 or so. But is that enough? Now that is a question about what is enough. I mean, this amount has been used for construction. It has not been used for operation and maintenance as we are discussing. So any repair, paying the electric bill, doing the water supply charges, paying the cleaner, that is not included here. So therefore, if you say, is it enough to run a complete sanitation system? It is not enough. And that is where the gap is, and we have to fill in the gap from somewhere.
Can I just make a point, Madhavan? Because in the context of availability of capital, we are perhaps looking at public funds. 92% of our development finance is public and will continue to be there. But we have Manoj here. Many years ago, who thought of wash financing? So I think when we look at capital, let's just don't look at public, which of course will continue to be a large sum, but philanthropic capital, CSR capital, and even commercial capital. And of course, there's a long way to go around, how each of these works. But I think when we look at just capital, just look at different forms of capital.
Absolutely.
Please.
And he mentioned about all this money being spent, but the panel also talked about failures. It's not about failures; it's work in progress. It's all unraveling, and urban sanitation has never been touched. It was in 2014 or whatever it began. There was no mention of urban sanitation. Whatever programming was happening, that was kept out of the radar. So we are talking about work in progress, And in this space now there is contestation. This can also happen, that can also happen, and that's the kind of discussion that is. Please don't go away with the sense that everything's been futile. No, it's just in the process of making things happen, you also get another set of, challenges.
हेलो, मेरा सवाल रोहित जी को है जिन्होंने लाइवलीहुड की बात की थी और स्किल्ड बेस्ड वर्कफोर्स रेडी होना ग्राउंड लेवल। हम बात कर रहे हैं रूरल की, बात कर रहे हैं हम अर्बन की, अभी मैडम ने बात की, और एक्चुअल मेट्रो सिटीज़ जो वाटर कंजर्वेशन के ऊपर बात होनी चाहिए वो भी एक इम्पॉर्टेंट है, जहाँ पे हम लोग बोल रहे हैं कि रूरल इंडिया में पानी ठीक से पहुँचना चाहिए, डिलीवर होना चाहिए। अकॉर्डिंगली सिटी के लोगों, मेट्रो के जो लोग हैं वहाँ पे रह रहे, टीम रह रही, सारे लोग रह रहे हैं, तो वो उस सिटीजन्स ने भी उसके ऊपर सोचना चाहिए। हमें भी इस तरीके का एक ड्राइव वाटर कंजर्वेशन को लेके मेट्रो सिटीज़, अर्बन से 3 टायर 2 टायर एंड इस कैटेगरी के सिटीज़ को एक टारगेट ओरिएंटेड कंजर्वेशन को लेके बात करने की बहुत ज़रूरी है, जो हम कोशिश कर रहे हैं अलग अलग स्तर पर। ये एक मेरा मुद्दा था। सेकेंड पॉइंट विल बी, अभी जो हम यहाँ पे सैनिटेशन में काम करने वाले अवॉर्डीज़ हैं, नहीं तो हम अलग अलग स्तर पर काम करने वाले छोटे छोटे NGOs हैं, नहीं तो कुछ बड़े NGOs भी हैं जो थोड़े मास लेवल पे काम करने की बात करते हैं। बट ऐसे रियलाइज होता है कि मास लेवल पे कब रीच होगा। बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस शुड बी रीच इन मास लेवल। तो मास लेवल पे पहुँचने के लिए कम फॉरवर्ड तो गवर्नमेंट अपने स्तर पर एक मुहिम चला रहा है, बट हमें भी एक सोच करनी चाहिए CSR को। स्पेशली रोहित जी ने जो पॉइंट रेज किया था, लाइवलीहुड, सस्टेनेबिलिटी और बेस्ट स्किल्ड वर्कफोर्स फॉर कम्युनिटी, ये तैयार करने के लिए, मास लेवल रीच करने के लिए CSR शुड कम फॉरवर्ड, और ना कि स्मॉल साइज में तो हम सभी लोग कर रहे हैं, अलग अलग स्तर पर कर रहे हैं। तो क्या उसको समराइज करके 1 पेज पे लेके आए और बेस्ट प्रैक्टिस को मास लेवल पे इम्प्लीमेंट करने के आगे सोच हम लोग रख सकते हैं क्या? यस, थैंक यू।
जस्ट वेरी ब्रीफली मैडम, आई वांट टू जस्ट मेक अ पॉइंट अराउंड कि आप बेस्ट प्रैक्टिस की बात कर रहे हैं। मेरे हिसाब से सबसे ज़्यादा हम लोग हमेशा केस स्टडीज़ और बेस्ट प्रैक्टिस बात करते हैं। ज़रूरत ये भी है कि फेलियर स्टडीज़ के बारे में भी बात करें, जो कि आपका सवाल था कि CSR कैसे उसको आगे ले जाए। सो परहैप्स द होल एस्पेक्ट ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग व्हाट डिडंट वर्क and where perhaps CSR could play a role could be an area for all of us to think about.
Sorry. Okay, we just last two.
Mic.
One for the gentleman.
He'll need a mic.
No question, and take to suggest on these points on mass approach. As a banker, I have found that at all districts, the district level consultative committees are operating, and those districts are sort of owned by one or the other bank. All the
Lead banker.
I think many bankers are sitting here, so everybody. So could you think of suggesting that at the district level, some body should be created where everybody gets a representation, including NGOs and industrial, industrial estates, and all representatives, they really sit and deliberate together that what is that could be done, because as madam said, cooperation, I think it's very important that all of us are talking all these issues in part. Incidentally, I am sitting with Naina on the steering committee, so and I'm privy to all the deliberations. I strongly recommend that a recommendation should go that at the district level, a committee should be formed with proper representation from different so that the mass can be, they can be reached, they can be taught, the literacy about the wash could reach. I think that's what is my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a gentleman in the back. Haji.
Sir, I am from Tata Institute of Social Science, recently passed out PGD WAS course. During my study in M Eastward, there I saw my question very small, like PPP and EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, and PPR. So here I interacted with those rag pickers, and there is a huge impact due to climate, and as ma'am said, like lived experiences. So are we really including them in policy making, either in SBM 3 or at a very grassroots level? And when we are including also, then we are really not making like misutilizing them, or really we are doing something like which are keeping in mind their social security and other things. Like they were hired by some sort of NGOs and private organizations. They were saying they are given only limited amount of money only, and that is only based on per day basis. So how we can do effectively utilize them in policy making? Are we really concerned about that or not? That's what is my question.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, I don't know whether I'll be able to answer your question or not, but I think on this solid waste management, there's been a lot of mobilization that has happened. Much of it has also depended on the capacity of the urban local bodies and how they are able to structure it. That in turn depended on how engaged the communities were. So one of the things that we did in both in Bhubaneswar and Jaipur was set up what are called public dashboard. We actually tracked segregation, collection at source, segregation at source, collection at home, all of that was tracked. And across the entire settlement, if a ward has 5 settlements, the upper income settlements did not cooperate. They said they have their own arrangements and they don't want to be part of this discussion. But the slums and the adjoining settlements all came into the process. And over a period of time, it became like a community cooperative with micro-composting centers coming in, rack pickers coming in, waste pickers coming in. It is possible, provided you create what is called a governance structure. Now, the NGO is not a governance structure. We are just, at best a channel. We are not a stakeholder in any sense. Neither are the corporates for that matter. It's the government and the community. These two owners on both ends have to be synergized, and these problems can be solved. And in all of this, the entire waste workers, the waste pickers, the waste workers are at the forefront of the change. So and in fact, the sanitary workers, the female sanitary workers, went house by house educating people on segregation, and they were very, very impactful.
Thank you. Wanted to add?
Yeah, just one point, that while we decide what we have to do, there is also a lot more to listen what is happening on the ground. What is happening currently, that we have got all sort of global reports, major cities reports which are coming in about the impact of climate change. But the people who are away from the city centers, metropolitans, their also voice needs to be captured and understood what is happening. Ramit talked about Malvan. One of the insights which we had in Malvan when we went, this is an area which is famous for Alfonso mango. Whenever the cyclonic activity takes place before May, it hits the flowering. In last 3 years, 2 years, the production has been down by 30 to 35%. That is major livelihood impact, but nobody has gone there to capture this story. Most of our people who are working in gig economy or traveling in these urban vendors, they are facing a large impact of the urban heating, which is having an impact on their livelihoods. So we need to capture these voices also from the ground. While the global models are very well appreciated and they need to be there, we also need to listen to what is happening on the ground more systemically. And then only I think we will have a greater clarity on how to respond either in policy or in implementation. Thank you.
I should close it because there's just 2 minutes left.
We spoke a lot about LHI, and LHI does exactly this. The only thing maybe, which Akila ji mentioned was the dashboard. So if you go in a rural setting, this is actually very easily available. Data is very easily available because the Gram Panchayat pins it on their board, on their billboard, right? I think where the challenge is in a city. Because in the city, it is the responsibility of the ULB to do it. And if you have a proactive ULB, they will do it. If you don't have a proactive ULB, they won't do it. However, I can say, I've seen in a lot of smaller cities, take Surendranagar, for example, in Gujarat. It's a small corporation, all right? But they have a blackboard and they publish their figures. So again, a lot of this has to do with how people work with their ULBs at a city level. And frankly, a lot of us who are from cities will know that the last thing we do is visit our ULBs. Whereas in a village, people go to the Gram Panchayat pretty much every single day, right? So that's the big difference. Sorry, Madhavan.
Not at all. Thank you. I'm going to try and wrap this up. I first want to thank all the panelists, Akhila, Romit, Sujoy, Harsh, and Alka, for sort of bringing together very different, diverse experiences to bear on a topic. And we've gone through a range of emotions in this panel discussion, from shock and awe to hope in some sense. And I'm going to leave us with just 3 or 4 takeaways. One is that I think it's important, particularly for us, to try and stress to policymakers that climate change is real, and that WASH, particularly access to water sanitation services, are going to be adversely impacted. So if we don't find a way to integrate these into our existing policies, whether SBN 3.0 or anything else, it's not going to be able to make a difference. Second is, infrastructure creation is easy, but if you don't have robust systems to operate, maintain, in some sense own these systems, it's not going to work. There is a lot that needs to be done for active decentralization and devolution to take root, not just in a rural context, but possibly more importantly in an urban context, where we also look at providing people who live in informal settlements with a voice. So there is a need. We have in some sense lost that plot with regard to decentralization, which needs to come back as a focus. We should lose sight of the importance of outcomes, and how in some sense being able to track progress against outcomes also creates pathways for new capital to flow in. We shouldn't look at capital only as public investment, but also the fact that there is commercial capital, there's private philanthropy capital, and we need to embrace all sorts of capital. Choice of technology has implications, but the lens has to be what is going to be easy for communities to own, operate, and maintain, and to recognize that all choices around technology are also political choices in some sense, and we have to be clear about it. And finally, let's not lose sight of the fact that issues like water, we're all trustees of it. No one necessarily owns it, urban or rural. And so in some sense, we can't lose sight of questions around equity when we're talking about transfer of water from a rural to urban, or from an urban back to a rural. We need to recognize that all of this needs to be governed by principles around equity. Thank you all.
Just wait for a few minutes. We will take a photograph of the entire panel. And while he's taking the photograph, I thank you, Madhavan, and the entire panel for such a great discussion. And I think that there must be few questions which remain unanswered, but you can always email us and we will be happy to answer back for you in few days. Thank you so much.
May I request the winners of the ISC FICCI Sanitation Awards to come near the stage for a group photo. Thank you.
Guests are requested to proceed for lunch in the banquet hall. If you are observing a fast, please visit the council room. A special spread has been arranged for you. अगर आप में से किसी ने भी नवरात्रि का व्रत रखा है, काइंडली काउंसिल रूम में जाइए. इट्स ऑन द 3rd floor.